let's talk about some of the research on microexpressions. I see generally out there are three camps, I guess. And the first one would say microexpressions are universal and they are largely fixed. So, one of the most famous, well known researchers on microexpressions is a guy named Paul Ekman. And his research is good research. I like Paul Ekman. I think he's on to something. I use his stuff. A lot of what I'm going to be teaching you is based on a lot of his stuff. But here's what he would say. He would say that he's identified 7 microexpressions that are universal. All right. So people in this camp, they say these are not bound by culture. You're not going to go to a different culture where they smile when they're sad and they frown when they're happy. You know, smiling is a universal sign for happiness. Frowning is a universal sign of sadness, for example. And he would also say that they're fixed. So they're universal and they're fixed. They're not changing. People in this camp are going to put a whole lot of faith in microexpressions. You know, if they think they saw a flash of a microexpression, they're more likely to believe what they believe they saw than what the other person says, even if they ask them about it. Okay, so that would be one extreme. Now, all the way on the other side of the spectrum, there's another group of people. For example, there's a book out there. I loved it, and I'm blanking on the author's name. I'm going to look it up though. Lisa Feldman Barrett, How Emotions Are Made, and she, in her book, which is fabulous, but she has a whole section where she critiques the research on microexpressions, and she cites studies that show that you can't trust them. They're not reliable. Often it's more about the person who's watching the expression and what's going on with them, and some really fascinating evidence that's put out there in some of these studies that I think we need to pay attention to. For example, they'll take a picture of a person with an emotional expression on their face, and they'll say, okay, what would this be? And according to, for example, Ekman's model, this person would be showing pain or sadness, something like that. And in reality, when you kind of zoom out and you see the context, this person is excited, like they just won, like an athlete who's just won a race. Okay. But it looks like pain when you just zoom in on the face. They're probably hurting from all that exercise or something like that. But you can't get too rigid about the microexpressions. These people would say that, maybe go so far as to say there's no such thing as microexpressions. Personally, I'm in the middle, the third bullet point on this slide here, which would say that microexpressions are real data points, but that they need contextual awareness for appropriate interpretation. There is a such thing as a microexpression. We do have these, but it's not as fixed and rigid and certain as some would say. But it's also far more reliable and real than others would say. And it depends on our contextual awareness. I have to have some idea of this person's context as I interpret what I think are microexpressions coming from that person. So this best happens if I'm attuned to the person.